Welcome back, everyone, to Issues of Faith. We have with us Dr. Thomas Kleinert. He is the senior minister at Vine Street Christian Church, a Disciples of Christ church. The church is celebrating its 200th anniversary. Now, they were delayed a year because of COVID, so they're actually 201 years old. Dr. Kleinert joining us via Zoom there. And Dr. Kleinert, as we went to break, you were talking about one of the stories. I mean, there's so many interesting stories, 200-year history. But Governor Andrew Johnson declared that all churches in the state must pledge allegiance to the Union. How did Vine Street respond to that?
Well, that was a fascinating detail, because the pastor at the time was not a U.S. citizen, and so he was a Brit, and so he basically pledged neutrality in this conflict. And I understand that for a while he actually raised the Union Jack above the church, which was downtown at that time, to basically declare it neutral ground. And then the sanctuary actually served as a hospital for wounded soldiers. I don't know for how long that went on. I'd have to look that up myself, but that's definitely a fascinating tidbit of information.
That is fascinating. And what about the African American makeup of the church going forward? Yeah,
the congregation had actually a fairly large African American membership, and there were two large Sunday school classes of African Americans, both slaves and freedmen. One particular story is really fascinating. Peter Lowry, who later became a well-respected and successful businessman in the community, he was a member of one of those Sunday school classes, and he had purchased his own freedom in 1840. Purchased the rest of his family in 1846, and then in 1859, one of these Sunday school classes basically became its own independent congregation. They were known as the Grapevine Church, and he was the pastor. And they continued. They first met out here, somewhere on Harding Road, actually, this part of town, and then moved back to downtown and met in a building he owned. He owned a good deal of real estate. And later on, they became the Gay Christian Church. And that is what today is New Covenant, a Christian church here in Nashville. So our roots go back together, way back into the 1840s, 1850s. And I just think it's fascinating that a figure like Peter Lowry, who bought his own freedom, had to buy his own freedom because he was a slave, then became not only a pastor in the community, but a respected businessman in Nashville, and then later out of this congregation, and that will be, no news for a good number of your audience. Preston Taylor came out of that congregation, who was in the early 20th century. So
yeah, Preston
Taylor. Very known leader in the community.
Fascinating. We talked about COVID at the top. Your church was around during COVID back in 1918. Not during COVID, during the Spanish flu. So how did the Spanish flu impact Vine Street all those years ago? Is there anything we can learn from that today?
Well, one thing we can learn is that things can change very, very quickly. So the historians tell us that church attendance across the board was very strong during the First World War. People were very much going to church because they were concerned about loved ones fighting in the war, and there were other impacts. And then in 1918. The flu epidemic broke, and in Nashville, which was actually one of the hardest hit cities in the United States, it hit really hard, particularly in October. when virtually no church in the city and what was the state then was able to meet, simply because so many people were sick. And in Nashville, I know for a fact that a good number of the churches closed down for the epidemic, but not so much out of public health concern, to keep this somehow from spreading, but because most of the sanctuaries were used as hospitals. So many people were sick. The city hospital ran out of capacity on the first day when the flu hit the city. And of course, a lot of the people who died in the epidemic were actually, unfortunately, very young people out at the powder plant, out in Old Hickory, where DuPont had built this large powder plant. And so a lot of the young people who had come to work there were among the victims of the flu in 1918. And I know that the minister at Vine Street, and I'm sure that's true for other ministers in the city at the time as well. The minister here was Kerry Morgan, and he went out several times, particularly out to the powder plant in Old Hickory, to preach to the workers there, because it was a devastating time. Yeah.
And then we'll go to today and the social issues that have divided many churches, LGBT issues, ordaining women in some cases. I mean, where do you all stand on all of that? Kind of what has been your point of view on those things?
We have a long history as a congregation and as a movement to really trust our people with those difficult conversations. And so we always make an effort to find the best education we possibly can. If need be, we invite a bunch of experts, and then we come to a decision. And I was around, actually, that was when I first came to this community back in the mid-90s, when a female member of the congregation asked if she could be married to her female partner at the church. And that was a first for the congregation. And so we had this very long, lovely study process that the elders organized, inviting medical experts, inviting legal experts, inviting psychologists, biblical scholars. And we met over the course of several weeks to study the issue, and basically said, yeah, there are some among us for whom this is personally very challenging, just because of personal history, and they find it very difficult to embrace this as the new normal. However, there are also many among us who see this as simply another way to live your marriage vows. So they didn't see a big discrepancy between a man and a woman getting married, or two partners of the same sex making those same promises, because the commitments are identical in their eyes. And so we've had a fairly open attitude definitely about gay and lesbian people, for example, at the time, being members of the congregation, being in leadership positions in the I mean, we've had, gay elders, wasn't an issue at all. And so similarly with women's ordination, that was a topic that was a big challenge back in the 70s predominantly. And at the time it was even, can we have female elders? And the congregation, even then, basically went ahead, studied the issue, and determined, there's really no reason not to have female elders, and why not ordain female leaders to ministry.
What I like in talking about history is you see that there is challenge after challenge, and that it has impacted congregations, every which way, and yet here we are. Your congregation is here, it is strong, it is vibrant, and despite the past year, despite the past 200 years, and that's what is so great. And I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we have to go. But Dr. Kleinert, thank you for being with us, and thanks to everyone for watching Issues of Faith.